Before my life veered off its predictable course, I never thought much about change. I grew up in a small town where routine was the norm and stability was celebrated. My days blended together: school, chores, a little fun on the weekends. My parents were hardworking, but not particularly affectionate, teaching me to value persistence and sacrifice over emotion. Love seemed like something people read about, not lived. When I met Lila in college, she stood out as someone who wanted more from life. Her vivacious energy, coupled with her laughter that could light up a room, made her irresistible. We married young, full of plans and dreams. Yet those dreams evolved into something neither of us could predict. Marriage became less about partnership and more about endurance as the years dragged on. After 6 years of marriage, I found myself sitting in my recliner, watching my wife, soon to be my ex-wife, walk out the door. The emotions were a blur, too fresh to process. Just this morning, she had asked me to be home by 6 for a talk. When I arrived, the absence of dinner was my first clue something was off. What followed hit much harder. 45 minutes earlier, Lila had come downstairs when she heard me enter. "Hi," she greeted me. "Let's talk in the living room. I have something to say." She didn't waste time. "When we got married, I thought we'd have a good life, but over the last 4 years, I've realized this isn't what I want. You're never around, and when you are, you're too exhausted to be there for me." I cut in. "I work long hours to pay the bills. You have a job, but I don't see much help from your end. My overtime and travel keep us afloat. If you contributed more, I could cut back on the out-of-town work." "You don't help with anything here either," she countered. "You insisted on those flower beds, but I'm the one who ends up taking care of them. And when I don't, you complain after being gone for a week. Why not hire someone to do that, and then maybe we could go dancing?" I suggested. She scoffed. "With what money? Look, Oliver, I'm done waiting for things to get better. I'm sick of being alone. I want more from life, and you're not giving it to me. I'm sorry, but I'm out." "So divorce?" I asked, stunned. "Yes. 6 months, and we'll both be free." "Who's paying for this?" I asked. "I'll cover the court costs," she replied. "Fair enough," I said, resigned. She put on her coat and headed for the door. She paused as if to say something, but didn't. I watched her leave, thinking about how pretty she was, and how demanding and self-centered too. Would I miss her? Probably, at least for a while. She was someone to come home to, someone I thought I loved. Now, I wasn't so sure. With nothing in the fridge and no motivation to look, I decided to grab dinner out. As I got into my car, I replayed our conversation. Not once had either of us mentioned the word love. That realization stung. I ended up at Miles's, a bar I hadn't been to in weeks. Lila's decision hurt, but deep down, I knew I'd move on. Sitting at the bar, I remembered my weekly ritual and bought a $5 scratch ticket instead of my usual $1 ones. Feeling bold, I also purchased tickets for the state lottery and Powerball. "Machines are probably smarter than me anyway," I joked to Miles as I let the computer pick my numbers. I moved to a booth, had a couple of beers, and avoided thinking about Lila. Later, I stopped at a steakhouse and ordered the smallest steak on the menu, washing it down with more beer. By the end of the night, I felt the alcohol catching up with me. Driving home cautiously, I wondered if Lila had left for good. Most likely she was at her sister's. Brenda, unlike Lila, had always been kind, but no point in dwelling on the past or her family. Once home, I undressed and remembered the scratch ticket in my pocket. Sitting on the bed, I scratched off the emblems. To my shock, I won $25,000. My excitement grew with each matching cow symbol I uncovered. Laughing, I thought about how this windfall would pay for my freedom. "Take that, Lila Grant," I muttered. "You can pay for the divorce, but I'll be just fine." Smiling, I locked the bedroom door and went to bed, ready to face a new chapter. If Lila came back, she could take the spare room. As far as I was concerned, the ticket was my only company tonight, and it was enough. The morning started with a tinge of sadness, until I remembered the lottery ticket. That brightened my mood. Deciding to keep it secure, I waited for the bank to open and rented a safe deposit box. I stashed the winning scratch-off ticket and the lottery ticket inside, jotting down the numbers on a scrap of paper I kept in my wallet. My life didn't feel like it was on the brink of major change, but maybe it was too soon to tell. Work demanded my attention, with a flight scheduled for 2 p.m. After finishing some office tasks, I went home at noon to prepare. Lila was still absent. Feeling uneasy, I called her sister Brenda, who informed me that Lila was staying with her. When Lila got on the phone, she reiterated that our relationship was over. She had already left and planned to return soon to collect her belongings. She clarified she wasn't interested in the house, leaving it to me if I chose to take over the mortgage. She only needed a list of assets for her lawyer, but wasn't expecting much, stating she simply wanted to move on with her life. I tried to reason with her, suggesting that we could have resolved our issues, especially since I intended to be home more often soon. She dismissed the idea, admitting she no longer loved me and wanted a fresh start. When I asked if someone else was involved, she denied it but didn't rule out the possibility in the future. Resigned, I acknowledged the end of our marriage and wished her well. I hung up, packed my bag, and headed to the airport. I trusted her to only take what was fair. Respect lingered between us, even if love was long gone. By Saturday, I was halfway across the country, fixing a commercial copier. During lunch, I remembered the state lottery drawing. Checking online, I saw there were no winners. Just my luck. The day stretched on, and by evening, I grabbed dinner and a beer before calling it a night. I'd wait for the Powerball results the next day. When I checked during lunch, I had nothing there either. By Wednesday morning, I was back home. Lila had clearly been by. The house felt emptier. The kitchen table was gone, though she'd left the breakfast stools. A couple of envelopes sat on the counter. One held divorce papers. The other listed everything she'd taken. Skimming it, I felt a pang of irritation. She'd cleared out the entire bedroom, the bed, the nightstands, the bureaus, even the lamps. Upstairs, the bedroom was stripped bare. Down the hall in the guest room, she had neatly organized my things. My clothes were in the dresser. My suits hung in the closet. A note lay on the nightstand. Oliver, I hope this setup works for you. I've moved into an apartment and didn't want to spend too much on furniture. You'll probably want a smaller bed now that you're on your own. To be honest, I hope to share my new bed with someone who will be there every night. Loneliness consumed me every time you left for work, and I couldn't take it anymore. I admit I haven't contributed much financially. I've been saving for a fresh start. You could fight me on it, but is it worth the hassle? I stopped touching our accounts 3 days before I told you I was leaving. That seemed fair to me. If you disagree, we can talk. Brenda thinks I'm making a mistake, but she has Jim. They go to bed together every night and wake up side by side. We never had that. Maybe we just weren't meant to. I could say I still love you, but I don't know if that's true. I'm fond of you, at least. Lila. I set the note down. It was a strange mix of practicality and finality. Lila was gone, and life had already moved on. The next morning, I checked the refrigerator, which was empty and spotless, just like the rest of the house. Lila's thorough departure was clear. I reviewed the divorce papers, which were exactly as she had described, signed them, and slipped them into the stamped envelope she had left. Looking out the window, I noticed the lawn was overgrown, the flower beds needed weeding, and the sprinklers hadn't been turned on. Lila had always envisioned a perfect home, but maintaining it had largely fallen on me. I resolved to simplify things eventually, maybe rip out the flower beds and expand the lawn for easier upkeep. But not today. I went out for dinner and lingered, watching the other diners. A bickering couple, a young pair deeply in love, and families with kids all caught my attention. I wondered where Lila and I might have fit in had we started a family. Later, I stopped at Miles's for a beer, bought some scratch tickets, and updated my lottery numbers. While talking with Miles, I shared the latest developments in my life. He suggested I consider a roommate to help with expenses and housework, but I wasn't sure I could trust someone. Despite everything, I realized I still trusted Lila to act fairly, even as we split. When he asked if I still loved her, I admitted it wasn't love I felt, just the inconvenience of starting over. Thursday morning, I managed to mow the lawn but ignored the flower beds. My neighbors didn't seem to notice Lila's absence, and casual conversations stayed neutral. At Miles's, I bought another Powerball ticket, scratched a $10 winner, and collected my winnings. Miles teased me about keeping track of my profits, and I admitted I was ahead but keeping quiet until the divorce was finalized. I didn't want to risk complications. The weekend brought no lottery wins, but I kept my tickets current before heading out of town for work on Monday. The house felt increasingly dusty and stale, but I planned meals carefully to avoid spoilage while I was away. Sunday night, Brenda called to check in. She mentioned Lila was adjusting but finding expenses higher than expected. Lila had started dating but hadn't found anyone serious. Brenda expressed hope that Lila wouldn't settle out of desperation, and I appreciated her kindness even as I joked about her being too sweet for her own good. Before hanging up, Brenda invited me to visit the family and promised chop suey on Thursday when I returned. I agreed, grateful for the connection, even as I reflected on Lila's complaints of loneliness during our marriage. Had she ever considered that I might have felt the same way? The state lottery jackpot was won on Tuesday, but not by me. As usual, Miles would get a laugh at my expense while still happily selling me more tickets. The Powerball prize had climbed to over $150 million, a number too large to even imagine, but I kept playing. Thursday evening, I joined Brenda for dinner. Lila was also invited, which didn't bother me. Despite everything, we were still curious about each other's new lives. Brenda's kids were all over me, reminding me how much I missed being part of their world. Brenda suggested I visit Lila's condo, but I declined, sensing some disappointment in her response. As I left, Lila walked me to my car. She expressed concern about how her decision to leave might have affected me. I reassured her that while the shock was real, I understood her reasons. I admitted missing her presence more for practical reasons like sharing chores than emotional ones, and I was confident life would move on. Lila seemed relieved, and we parted amicably, with her expressing hope that future encounters would remain comfortable. That night, I stopped by Miles's bar, bought tickets for the next state lottery and Powerball, and went home. The next day promised more yard work, but Miles had other ideas. He mentioned finding a housekeeper for me, a young war widow named Eva with 2 kids who was facing eviction. Despite my initial reluctance, I couldn't ignore the weight of her situation. A winning $1,000 scratch ticket sealed the deal, and I agreed to meet her. By the time I returned to Miles's bar for the meeting, I was too busy with work to dwell on what to expect. I envisioned someone modest and unassuming. But as people entered the bar, I didn't immediately notice anyone who seemed like the woman Miles had described. I waited, unsure of what was ahead, but open to the possibility of something or someone new entering my life. She walked into the bar with a graceful stride, tall and poised, catching my attention despite her understated figure. Settling halfway down the bar, her pleasant voice carried as she ordered ginger ale. Our eyes met a few times, and on the third, she smiled faintly. I overheard her ask the bartender about Miles, explaining she was supposed to meet someone named Oliver Grant. Realizing it was me, I approached her, introduced myself, and guided her to a booth. I ordered her a refill and my beer to join us. We talked. Eva admitted Miles had painted a dramatic picture of me as a heartbroken man, devastated by my wife's departure. I countered with the truth. While my wife had left, I wasn't wallowing in despair. I explained I was looking for a housekeeper, potentially live-in, since I traveled frequently. She then clarified her own situation. A war widow with 2 children, she was being displaced due to city redevelopment and needed a place to stay. Though she had insurance money and wasn't destitute, finding a suitable home for her and her children was a challenge. She mentioned she was taking her kids to McDonald's that evening, a rare treat for them. Seeing an opportunity, I suggested we go together so I could meet her children. She agreed. At McDonald's, I met her son and daughter, Logan, 6, and Therese, 7. They were polite and well-behaved, clearly a testament to her parenting. Afterward, I took them to see my house. Eva was impressed by the flower beds and even pulled a weed, remarking on her love for gardening. Inside, I showed her the layout and discussed arrangements. Eva insisted that while she and her daughter would share the master bedroom, they'd need separate beds, a full for herself and a twin for Therese. Logan could take the spare room. She hesitated before asking if I expected a physical relationship. I assured her that I had no such intentions and valued clear boundaries to ensure mutual respect and comfort. We discussed finances. I'd cover most expenses, including groceries and utilities, and give her a credit card for household needs. Eva insisted on contributing to the food bill, especially since her children would eat more than I would during my absences. She joked that she seemed to be getting the better end of the deal, given my generosity and lack of demands. Before leaving, Eva asked if I could check her current beds to determine if they were suitable to bring along. She mentioned her daughter's nickname, Tinkerbell, with a warm smile that revealed the affection she had for her children. I agreed, feeling a mix of relief and hope that this arrangement might bring some much-needed life back into my empty house. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about Eva's daughter, Tinkerbell. The nickname suited her perfectly, and while Eva wasn't traditionally attractive, her daughter certainly was. By 10:30, I was at the bar, ready to test Eva's luck with a scratch ticket. I handed it to Miles, challenging him to scratch it himself. To my amusement, it turned out to be a $50 winner. True to our wager, he bought another ticket, but it was a dud. "Oliver, you're a prick," he joked, grinning. Miles then pried about Eva. I dodged the question, teasing him about the lies he'd told us both. Before he could press further, I left without waiting for the lottery drawing. I skipped the bar Saturday, but returned Sunday to grab tickets for the state lottery and Powerball. Miles wasn't working, so he still didn't know if Eva had moved in. Monday morning, I set off for work. planning to return Wednesday evening. Before I left, Eva asked for the house keys, casually mentioning she might stop by to dust. I didn't think much of it, preoccupied with a particularly tricky job. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, I noticed an old Camry parked outside. Stepping inside, the aroma of pot roast greeted me. Eva was in the kitchen, pulling a Dutch oven off the stove. "Hi," she said casually, suggesting I wash up and grab a beer. She had called Miles to ask what I drank, and she'd even tried my usual Genesee Light, calling it sweet but not bad. The table was set with floral patterned dishes I didn't recognize. When I asked about them, she explained they were wedding gifts she'd barely used. Though her husband was gone, she'd decided it was time to move forward and use them daily. Her voice was steady, but I noticed her eyes glistening. The kids joined us for dinner after playing on the patio. Ava led a short prayer before we ate, saying she preferred to thank the Lord for life's ups and downs rather than complain. The meal was excellent: pot roast with onions, carrots, and potatoes. Partway through, I realized the dining table wasn't there when I'd left on Monday. Eva explained she'd moved in during the week and that this would be their first night in the house. As we finished dinner, Logan commented on the size of my TV. I mentioned my smaller one had gone with Lila. Tinkerbell, curious, asked why my wife wasn't living with me. Eva scolded her gently, but I reassured her it was fine to ask. I explained how Lila and I had grown apart due to my work and agreed to separate amicably. I even directed them to a photo album under the TV if they wanted to see what she looked like. The kids eagerly retrieved it. Tinkerbell studied the pictures, particularly the ones of Lila in a swimsuit, then glanced at her mother. The difference between the two women was obvious. Eva noticed but stayed quiet as I explained who was in other photos, including Lila's sister Brenda and her family. I complimented Eva's cooking, calling it the best meal I'd had in years, which earned me a genuine smile. After dinner, I helped clean up while the kids watched TV. Eva thanked me for the compliment, joking that kids shouldn't think anyone was prettier than their mother. I agreed, but emphasized that beauty wasn't everything, sharing how I'd dated an overweight girl in high school who turned out to be one of the best people I'd ever known. Later, we sat on the patio before I called it a night. Exhausted from traveling, I crawled into bed, appreciating the clean sheets. As I drifted off, I felt a strange sense of comfort and ease, a rare feeling since Lila had left. Thursday morning, I took Eva and the kids downtown to handle a few errands. First, we stopped by the bank, where I added her name to my credit card account. It had an $11,000 limit, which I always paid off monthly. To me, it made sense to ensure she could manage emergencies if I wasn't around, whether it was a broken furnace, a leaking roof, or some other unforeseen expense. Once the paperwork was complete, the bank informed us that new cards, one for each of us, would be mailed shortly. Outside, Ava looked concerned and asked why I'd given her access to such a high-limit card. I explained my reasoning. Emergencies happen, and I don't want you or the kids stranded without options when I'm out of town. This is my house and my responsibility, everything in it, including you and the kids. Don't worry about the limit, just use the card if you need it. I added that I wasn't swimming in cash, but would soon get a raise, which would help manage costs. Eva seemed to relax, giving me a faint smile, though I could tell she was still processing the gesture. As we returned home, I told her I wanted to meet her parents that evening. It'll give me a chance to introduce myself properly, and maybe we can leave the kids with them for an hour or so, I said. She agreed, mentioning that her parents would undoubtedly ask about how I was treating their grandchildren. Then I'll have to be on my best behavior, I joked, and Eva smiled, noting I had already made a good impression. Later, at Miles's bar, he greeted us with his usual brand of humor. "Oliver, I never see you anymore. What's this world coming to? You used to be a regular," he said dramatically. I ordered a beer and suggested a mix of wine and ginger ale for Eva, which she accepted with a laugh. Miles, of course, couldn't resist a jab. "Watch out, Ava. He might try to get you drunk." She rolled her eyes and replied, "Not a chance." I bought my usual scratch ticket and lottery picks, scratching the ticket as Miles handed me my items. The $5 win was small but enough to cover our drinks, prompting Miles to shake his head in mock despair. "He's going to break me someday," he lamented. Afterward, we headed to Eva's parents' house. Her father, tall and lean like her, greeted us warmly, while her shorter, curvier mother quickly caught my attention. I tried not to stare, but she noticed and laughed, teasing, "I know, it's a shame these didn't pass on to my daughter." Eva responded with a grin, "I'd rather avoid the backaches, thank you very much." Their playful banter made it easy to feel at ease. The kids were soon yawning, so I carried Logan to the car, his head resting heavily on my shoulder. By the time we got home, both kids were sound asleep, and Eva tucked them into bed. Meanwhile, I settled in front of the TV to watch a country music show featuring Dolly Parton. Eva wandered in, catching me mid-watch, and smirked. "What is it with men and women's bosoms?" she quipped. "I'm calling Mom to let her know what you're watching." Half an hour later, she returned with a playful glint in her eye. "Mom says I should make you marry me. She even joked she wishes she were single." Laughing, I replied, "Well, I must have made quite the impression." Eva quickly dismissed the notion of marriage, reminding me she was just the housekeeper. I pushed back gently. "You're more than that. In just a week, you've made this house feel alive again. I can't remember the last time I felt this comfortable." She gave me a quiet smile but didn't argue. The next few days passed smoothly. I was home every evening, greeted by the smell of home-cooked meals and the sight of the kids excitedly playing on the new swing set and jungle gym I had installed in the backyard. Eva had kept the yard in perfect shape, the flower beds meticulously weeded. When I commented on her work, she mentioned she had more free time now that her freelance editing was slow. "Not having to scramble for rent is a godsend," she admitted. On Thursday morning, as I prepared to leave for work, Eva casually mentioned she had a dinner date Friday night and asked if I could watch the kids. Though her words were matter of fact, they hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, but I masked my reaction with a smile. "Of course," I said lightly, suggesting we have a pizza and movie night. "The kids and I will have our own little party." She seemed relieved and thanked me, but as I left for work, I couldn't shake the sharp sting of jealousy. We'd never discussed dating others, and I just assumed that if either of us went out, it would be together. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to quiet my thoughts. By morning, I was irritable, and Eva noticed. When she asked if something was wrong, I deflected, blaming a difficult machine repair at work. Though she seemed to accept my explanation, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something between us had shifted. Friday evening, I got home earlier than usual. Eva was already dressed for her evening plans, wearing a sleek black dress with her hair elegantly styled. She'd even made subtle enhancements to her figure, and the effect was stunning. She looked radiant, clearly waiting for me to notice. "You look amazing, Eva," I said. She smiled confidently. "I know, I feel like a queen tonight. Maybe I'll have to go out more often." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. The pizza delivery had arrived, and as I set it down, the bell rang again. This time, a well-dressed man about 10 years older than Eva stood at the door. He was driving a Mercedes, which was parked at the curb. Eva introduced him as Richard Tromley, her employer. She mentioned that he had been kind to her over the past 2 years and occasionally invited her out. I shook his hand, introducing myself, but the moment felt awkward. Eva turned back to me before leaving. "Make sure the kids are in bed on time." "I might be late, so don't wait up," she said before heading out with Richard. I stood there, feeling a pang I couldn't quite explain. Jealousy wasn't something I'd experienced often, not even when Lila used to go out for work events. But this was different. I reminded myself that Eva was just my housekeeper, someone I barely knew. Still, the discomfort lingered. Needing a distraction, I called Brenda. "Hey, I had some swings put in the backyard for some kids who are staying here. Bring yours over tomorrow to try them out," I said. Brenda laughed. "What's new with you?" "Not much. The kids belong to the woman who helps with the house. She's out tonight, so I'm watching them. They're about the same age as Simon and Pearl." "Why aren't you dating your housekeeper?" "You know Lila's dating, right? She's even staying over sometimes. Does that bother you?" "Not at all. I'll be dating soon enough. I have an office full of secretaries to choose from." "What about Eva?" "Not a chance. I'd rather not complicate things. Besides, she has kids." "You've always wanted kids, Oliver. You adore Simon and Pearl." "True, and these two are well-behaved. But I need to focus on other things right now." Brenda pressed me for more details, eventually convincing me to host a cookout the next day so she could meet Eva. I agreed and hung up, laughing at her persistence. That evening, I spent time with Logan and Tinkerbell watching Shrek before tucking them into bed. As I kissed Tinkerbell goodnight, she asked, "Oliver, can I have a goodnight kiss?" My friend says her daddy always kisses her goodnight. Mommy kisses me, but nobody kisses her. I think she'd like to be kissed too. Her innocent words left me smiling. "Good night, sweetheart. Sleep tight," I said, gently kissing her forehead. Later, I waited for Eva to return. By midnight, she still wasn't home. I went to bed, unable to stop imagining where she might be or what she might be doing. When she finally came in at 1:30 a.m., I pretended to be asleep, unwilling to confront her. The next morning, I left early for breakfast at IHOP and then headed to the office, even though it was Saturday. At 10 a.m., I called the house. Eva answered, excitedly saying she wanted to tell me about her evening. She sounded genuinely happy, sharing that she'd had a wonderful time. I invited her to join me for a light lunch, letting her know Brenda and her family would be coming over for a cookout later. When I got home, she had prepared tomato soup and cucumber sandwiches. Sitting down, she explained the night before. She'd attended a formal dinner and awards ceremony for the magazine she freelanced for. It had been her first invitation to such an event, and she was thrilled to have been recognized as the most dedicated part-time editor. After the dinner, there was a dance and storytelling session that lasted until midnight. She apologized for not calling, assuming I would be fine with the kids. Relieved, I said, "Oh, that's great. I didn't realize it was a work event. I thought it was just a date with your boss." Ava's expression shifted. "A date? Why would you think that?" "Well, you didn't explain much. You got dressed up, an older man picked you up in a fancy car, and you said you'd be home by 11. Next time, maybe it'd be a little clearer so I don't worry." She softened. "You were worried about me." I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Not really. You're an adult. You can take care of yourself." Ava smiled knowingly. "Still, I think you were worried. That's sweet of you." Neither of us seemed eager to continue the conversation. Instead, we quietly shifted back into the routine of the day, leaving the unresolved feelings unspoken. I glanced at photos of Brenda and thought she was strikingly beautiful. It crossed my mind how stunning Eva had looked the night before, though I didn't say it aloud. Later, I went outside to clean the grill, and Eva took charge of marinating the steaks, deciding how she wanted them prepared. While we worked in the kitchen, Ava mentioned hearing about the goodnight kiss I had given Tinkerbell. She seemed happy about it, expressing how much it meant for Tinkerbell to have moments like that, especially after missing out on a father's affection. She also noted how I had been attentive to Logan, which made her appreciate Miles even more for connecting us. I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't considered thanking me the same way. That afternoon, Brenda came by and quickly hit it off with Eva. Pearl and Simon began visiting often, and the house grew livelier. Sometimes I would return home to find Eva the only one there to welcome me, but her presence always felt warm and inviting. One day, I ran into Lila at the grocery store. We ended up chatting for over an hour, weaving around shoppers as we blocked the aisle. Lila seemed content and admitted she had made the right choice in leaving. She mentioned meeting someone and hinted at moving in with him, but assured me it wouldn't create any issues between us. I reassured her I was in a good place, though I joked that her new relationship was likely more intimate than anything in my life at the moment. Lila, in turn, brought up Brenda's impression of Eva, and how she believed there could be something deeper between us if I gave it a chance. Lila seemed genuinely happy for me, even congratulating me on an upcoming raise and joking about the time we spent figuring out we weren't meant for each other. As we parted ways, I realized I didn't miss her at all. That evening, I stopped by Miles's bar to grab my usual tickets, but for the first time in months, my scratch ticket wasn't a winner. Miles found it amusing and teased me about my streak ending, even asking when I'd finally take things further with Eva. His remarks, while lighthearted, stuck with me. When I arrived home, I overheard Ava talking to her mother in the living room. The kids were staying at her parents' house for the night. Ava's voice carried as she shared how much she valued having me in her life, even admitting she felt more strongly about me than she had about her late husband. She hesitated, saying she couldn't simply act on those feelings because she respected my boundaries, though she entertained the idea of doing something special on my birthday. Hearing her words, I couldn't stay silent. I walked into the room and placed my hands on her shoulders, startling her as she ended the call. Her surprised expression softened as I leaned down to kiss her. The house was quiet with the kids away, and the moment between us quickly escalated. Ava shed her hesitations, as well as her blouse, and for the first time, the barriers we had both been holding on to came down. Though she voiced a desire for more than a fleeting connection, the night unfolded with an intensity neither of us had anticipated. We didn't even make it upstairs at first, caught in the moment before eventually finding our way to bed. The night marked a turning point, something unspoken, yet profoundly felt by both of us. By morning, everything seemed both new and inevitable, as if it had always been meant to happen. The light streaming through the window woke me. It took me a second to remember where I was, her bed. This was only the second time I'd stepped into Eva's bedroom, the first being to tuck Tinkerbell in and kiss her goodnight. But waking up here now, with the faint scent of her lingering in the sheets, filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was more comforting than my own bed had been for a long time, probably since Lila and I started drifting apart 2 years ago. I pulled myself out of bed, made my way to the kitchen, and started the coffee. As the rich aroma filled the air, Eva came in and sat down at the table. She didn't need to say much for me to understand what was on her mind. I could see it in her eyes, the weight of an unspoken question that had lingered since last night. Did I mean it when I told her I loved her? It wasn't the kind of thing I said lightly, not even in the heat of the moment. I did love her. I loved the kids. I loved waking up in a home that felt whole again. I told her as much, my words straightforward and from the heart. It felt good to talk about the little things after that. She mentioned her raise at work, and I reassured her that things were financially steady on my end. The truth was, I was doing better now than when Lila left. Eva's face lit up when I told her I'd be traveling less for work. She said the kids would be thrilled, and I believed her. Even she admitted how much she hated my being gone, how empty the house felt without me. I didn't need her to tell me that the kids noticed everything, including how happy she was when I was around. But for now, we agreed to keep the more intimate details of our relationship from them. They didn't need to know yet. Eva left to pick up the kids while I stayed behind, enjoying the quiet for a little longer. I poured myself another cup of coffee and flipped on the TV. The news was on, and I caught a segment that stopped me cold. Miles's bar, my regular spot, had sold one of the winning state lottery tickets. The jackpot was $3.2 million, split between two winners. The numbers flashed on the screen, and I knew them instantly. They were mine. My mind raced. Miles knew I played the same numbers religiously. He'd figure it out, but I trusted him to keep quiet until I had a chance to talk to him. The payout, $1.6 million over 20 years, wasn't earth-shattering, but it was solid. It was a future I could plan for. Still, I wasn't going to tell Eva. Not yet. I hadn't even told her about the scratch ticket stashed in the bank deposit box. Timing mattered, and I didn't want this news to change anything between us right now. By the time Eva and the kids returned, I was nursing my third beer. She gave me a look that was equal parts amused and curious. Drinking in the morning wasn't my style, and she called me out on it. I laughed, brushing it off as a celebration, though I didn't elaborate. That little moment of humor carried through the day. The kids didn't understand why we were all laughing, but it didn't matter. The house was full of life, and for the first time in a while, I felt like things were exactly as they should be. That night after dinner, I told Eva I was heading over to Miles's to grab a scratch ticket. She teased me about celebrating, but she didn't mind. What she didn't know was that I needed to talk to Miles about the lottery ticket. The bar was packed when I arrived, buzzing with excitement over the big win. Miles caught my eye and gave me a grin when he had a free moment. He knew I'd put his bar on the map, and he was thrilled. I got straight to the point, asking him if he had to reveal who bought the winning ticket. He reassured me that he didn't and promised to keep it to himself, at least for now. He warned me that people would start speculating, but I could live with that. Before I left, Miles gave me a knowing look. He mentioned Eva, hinting that I didn't need to work too hard to win her over. He had no idea how far things had already progressed, but when he figured it out, he just laughed and congratulated me. As I walked home, the weight of the day's events settled over me. The lottery win, Eva, the kids. It was a lot to take in. But for the first time in years, I felt like life wasn't just happening to me. I had something to look forward to, something real. I scratched my ticket again, reclaiming a modest $2 win. With no beer on my breath, I went home feeling like things were finally falling into place. Life settled into a steady rhythm. The kids attended school, Eva began receiving more editing assignments, and my job brought me new responsibilities. Despite the increased workload, I was home nearly every night, and that made all the difference. On my 20th birthday, Lila made an appearance. I welcomed her warmly and was introduced to her new boyfriend, Thomas Davis. He worked in construction, an occupation I hadn't expected for her partner. I always thought Lila would choose someone with a more prestigious career, but it was clear that didn't matter to her. They were deeply in love, and that was enough. Somehow, word spread during the evening's celebration, and by the time the guests began to leave, every adult in the room seemed to know I was romantically involved with my housekeeper. I suspected my future mother-in-law had let it slip. As Lila was leaving, she stopped to share a parting thought. She admitted she adored Eva's children, but wouldn't have imagined Eva as a match for me. Still, she acknowledged our happiness and asked if it was a lasting arrangement. I confirmed it was, explaining how working locally and being home every night had brought Eva and me closer. I even told her I understood why she had left and wished her well with Thomas. Her response was gracious, saying my words had earned me an invitation to their upcoming wedding. Professionally, my life took a turn when I was assigned a personal secretary. Vivian was young, stunning, and quick-witted, and her presence stirred a few complications I hadn't anticipated. When a sudden trip to the company headquarters arose, I was too busy to handle my travel preparations. Without much thought, I sent Vivian to my house to retrieve my bags. This decision proved to be a mistake. Eva's jealousy flared as soon as Vivian arrived, though I was oblivious at the time. Upon my return, Eva's behavior was cold and distant. She avoided conversation, let alone any affection. I sensed something was wrong, but it wasn't until the kids were asleep and the house was quiet that I decided to address it. I knocked on her door, determined to figure out the cause of her frustration. She was blunt, accusing me of being unfaithful during my trip. Her suspicions stemmed from Vivian's mention of our adjoining hotel rooms with interconnecting doors. I immediately set the record straight. The shared rooms were a matter of practicality for work, nothing more. I reminded Ava of a similar situation when she had gone on a platonic date with her boss and how I had trusted her completely. I took her hand and led her to my room, where I stripped down, hoping to reassure her with honesty and vulnerability. Reluctantly, she allowed me to explain further. Vivian, I revealed, had confessed early in our working relationship that she wasn't interested in men. She put on a flirty facade as a professional cover, but her significant other, Sophie, was just as striking as she was. The shared hotel rooms were strictly for after-hours productivity. Eva's tension began to melt away, though she was still skeptical. I reassured her, pointing out that she had nothing to fear from Vivian, and added a bit of humor. Vivian would likely joke at our wedding about losing the best thing that ever happened to her. It was all an act, nothing more. With that, Ava finally softened, admitting the pain of her jealousy had been unbearable. She promised not to let it consume her again, and for the first time in days, she climbed into bed beside me. That night, we rekindled the connection that had felt so strained just hours before. Our wedding was planned for the last Saturday in November, a cozy morning ceremony at Miles's bar. Miles generously offered us the space until 4 p.m. for the reception. Brenda would serve as matron of honor, with Tinkerbell and Pearl as attendants, while Miles stood by me as best man, joined by Logan and Simon. To make room for dancing after the catered meal, the bar's tables would be removed. It was shaping up to be a day filled with love, laughter, and celebration, a fitting start to the next chapter of our lives together. I had a small family, and Ava's only close relatives were her parents. For the wedding, Eva invited 3 of her colleagues from the magazine, including her boss and his wife, who couldn't stop laughing at the fact that I'd once been jealous of him. Earlier that summer, I had extended invitations to several of my coworkers, a mix of men and women. Brenda, Jim, and their kids were delighted to see I had stayed close to them, just as I had when I was married to Lila. Including Brenda and her children in the wedding ceremony as part of Eva's circle further solidified our enduring friendship. Lila returned her RSVP, stating that she and Thomas would attend. She signed the note as Mrs. Thomas Davis, revealing they had tied the knot at City Hall 2 days prior. I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't invited me to her wedding. The highlight of the day for Eva and me came when we realized how much we both loved polka dancing. We practiced a few intricate moves together and discovered dancing could become a hobby we'd both enjoy. Meanwhile, Vivian and her partner Sophie were indulging in drinks, with Vivian her usual flirtatious self. She intercepted me on my way back from the restroom, insisting I dance with her to discuss something. As the band began a waltz, I half supported Vivian, who was clearly tipsy, as we made our way onto the dance floor. She confided that Sophie wanted her to come out publicly and suggested I announce it during a toast. I made sure she understood the implications. There would be no turning back once it was said aloud. Vivian confirmed she was ready, especially since they planned to marry in Massachusetts over the New Year holiday. Returning to the head table, I called for everyone's attention by tapping a knife against my glass. Standing between Vivian and Sophie, I began my announcement. I joked that Vivian, often the object of office daydreams and the most attractive woman in our workplace, had chosen her life partner, meaning her colleagues would no longer have a chance at her affections. Then I invited her to share a kiss with the one she loved. The room fell silent for a moment as Vivian and Sophie kissed, before applause drowned out an initial murmur of, "What a waste." The couple stepped apart, and I offered my congratulations with a hug. Eva joined in, embracing Vivian while I hugged Sophie. Soon, a line formed as guests came forward to share their well wishes. Later, Eva and I danced a few more times before preparing to leave for our honeymoon. Lila approached, asking for one last dance with her ex-husband. I agreed, And as we moved across the floor, she opened up. She reflected on her decision to leave and admitted she believed it had been best for both of us. She commented on how happy I seemed and confessed she had initially thought Eva wasn't attractive. However, after seeing Eva that night, Lila admitted she was beautiful and an excellent dancer. As the conversation turned reflective, Lila stopped herself from asking a personal question, realizing it might hurt both of us. Instead, she wished me well, and we agreed to remain friends. Before leaving Miles' bar, I bought a scratch ticket, which netted me $5. A small but amusing gesture to cap off the day. Settling into married life with Eva felt profoundly different from my first marriage. Eva treated me with a respect I had never received from Lila, and we shared a deep sense of mutual happiness. Vivian and Sophie returned from their wedding, radiating the joy of newlyweds. While Vivian's absence from office flirtations was noted, everyone supported their relationship. The couple spent a lot of time with Eva in the weeks following their marriage. Although Eva was initially concerned about their frequent visits, I reassured her that they were simply adjusting to being open about their relationship and would eventually need less support. A few months into our marriage, I decided it was time to share some financial news with Eva. She had taken over managing our household budget, so I asked her about our current net worth. After she showed me her calculations, I casually mentioned we could add $80,000 to her figures. Confused, she asked what I meant. I explained that I had been holding on to a winning lottery ticket, the one Miles's bar had sold, but no one had claimed. I had kept it in the bank all this time and planned to cash it in. Eva was shocked, but curious why I had waited so long. I admitted that when I won, we were only separated, and I didn't want the money to complicate things with Lila or influence my growing relationship with Eva. Looking back, I doubted Lila would have made any claim, but I hadn't wanted to risk it then. Eva processed the revelation and asked how much the winnings were worth. I told her it was $80,000 a year for 20 years, though taxes would take a portion. She wondered how we would handle the money and whether it might change us. I assured her it wouldn't affect who I was or my love for my work and colleagues. Eva shared my excitement, though she braced herself for the inevitable media attention and unsolicited requests for money. We reminisced about the night I won, realizing it was the same night I had come home and confidently embraced her for the first time. She teased me, saying the lottery had given me the courage I needed. We laughed about how the initial chaos of public interest eventually settled, leaving us to enjoy our lives in peace. Miles continued selling me scratch tickets twice a week and a Powerball ticket for each drawing. He often teased me about my persistence. "Why bother? Lightning doesn't strike twice," he'd say, shaking his head. "Why not just buy a whole roll of those scratch tickets if you're so set on playing? You've got the money for it." I'd shrug and reply that while I could afford to play more, I wasn't greedy. I enjoyed the occasional win on the scratch tickets and didn't want to mess with my streak. Miles would snort and return to wiping the bar. Life couldn't have been better. Our neighborhood was a perfect fit, and the house sat on a lot large enough for expansion. We'd have to sacrifice some of the sprawling flower beds Lila had planted, but I didn't mind. Those beds had been her passion, not mine, and with her gone, it felt right to let them go as well. Being home every evening and Eva working from home meant we'd grown more social with the neighbors. Monthly get-togethers became a tradition, and though Brenda and Jim lived a little farther away, they were always included. Lila, still friendly with many in the neighborhood, often attended too. Brenda informed us one day that Lila and Thomas were expecting a baby. Apparently, the pregnancy had been well underway before their wedding. Though Eva and Lila knew each other, they weren't close, and I suspected that my previous marriage to Lila kept them from being real friends. By Lila's 8th month, disaster struck. Thomas fell from a 20-foot scaffold at work, shattering his hip. Unable to work for months and with only workers' comp to rely on, they were struggling financially. The neighborhood rallied, organizing a baby shower to support them. Alongside traditional baby gifts, someone suggested scratch tickets as a creative addition. I wrestled with a decision. Could I give Lila a substantial amount of money that Eva didn't even know I had? It felt wrong to keep it a secret from her. I decided to come clean. "Eva, I need to tell you about something involving money," I began cautiously. She raised an eyebrow. "Does this affect me now?" "In a way, yes. But I want you to make the final call," I explained before telling her the story. On the night Lila had told me she wanted a divorce and left, I'd gone to Miles's bar and bought a scratch ticket. It turned out to be a big winner, $25,000. I'd never cashed it and had kept it in the bank ever since. The ticket had to be redeemed within 2 months. Eva was quiet for a moment before connecting the dots. You're thinking about giving it to Lila, aren't you? I nodded. What do you think? Her response was thoughtful. Go get it. Add 5 more scratch tickets from Miles, and I'll put everything in an envelope for the shower. I'll handle giving it to her. She'll never know it came from you. Ava's excitement grew. What were your thoughts when you first realized you'd won so much money? I laughed. It's funny now, but that night I'd had more beer than usual, and it was the first time I'd gone to bed without Lila there. I remember thinking I had no wife to keep me warm, just a ticket. Then I panicked, worrying she might get her hands on it. Silly, right? No, not silly. I think it was kind of sweet. Lila's going to be thrilled, she said with a grin. The evening of the shower, Ava sent me to hang out at Miles' bar until she got home. I bought my usual scratch ticket, which was a dud, and my Powerball ticket. Nursing a beer, I stayed until nearly 11 before heading home. Ava came in around midnight, buzzing with excitement. Lila cried, she told me. At first, she didn't understand why someone gave her a ticket that was already scratched. Once she figured it out, we all went to Miles's to cash them in. She left with $27,304, enough to get them through until Thomas can work again. No one suspects it was from you. I'm so glad we did this. Then she paused and added, I have some news too. I took a pregnancy test this morning. Though tired and ready for bed, her words jolted me wide awake. Later, as we came out of the shower, Ava mentioned something that caught my attention. Miles seemed a little odd as we left. He told me to make sure you checked your Powerball numbers before going to bed. Apparently, it's a big jackpot tonight. $275 million. Where's your ticket? Life is a strange mix of unexpected turns, isn't it? That night, when Eva mentioned the Powerball numbers, I remember fishing out the ticket from the pile of papers on the counter, almost absent-mindedly. I grabbed my phone to check the results, a mix of curiosity and skepticism running through me. I didn't expect much. It was just another ticket, another day. But as the numbers came into focus on my screen, my heart stopped. They matched. Every single one. I sat there in stunned silence, the enormity of it refusing to sink in. $275 million. A sum so large it felt more like a story I was reading than my own reality. Ava noticed my expression before I said a word. She leaned over my shoulder, her breath catching as she saw the numbers too. Are you serious? She whispered, her voice trembling. I could only nod. We stayed like that for a long moment, the weight of what this could mean filling the room. Then, almost as if breaking a spell, she grabbed my hand and pulled me into the living room. We laughed, cried, and danced in the moonlight, like kids who'd found the ultimate treasure. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I reached out to a financial advisor to navigate the complexities of the winnings, ensuring we kept a low profile while deciding how to use the money. Eva and I agreed on a few principles early on. We wouldn't let this change who we were, and we'd use the windfall to build a future that mattered, not just for us, but for those we cared about. We paid off the house, expanded the backyard, and made it a haven for Logan, Tinkerbell, and the growing family we were building. Brenda and Jim were among the first to benefit, with an anonymous donation to help their kids through college. Miles received an upgraded bar with a refurbished kitchen and a new sound system, a way to give back to the place that had been a constant in my life. As for Lila and Thomas, they received more help than they ever expected, though they never knew it came from me. Eva and I agreed it was better that way. They deserved a fresh start, just as we had found ours. The rest of the money went into investments, charities, and creating experiences that brought joy and meaning to our lives. We traveled, explored, and learned together as a family. Eva continued her freelance editing, though she took on fewer projects to focus on our home. I scaled back my work even further, choosing assignments that allowed me to be home most nights. Our wedding anniversary became a celebration not just of our love, but of the life we had built together, a life filled with laughter, love, and a deep sense of gratitude. Every now and then, I'd stop by Miles's bar, buying my usual scratch tickets and sipping a beer, smiling at the life I never could have imagined. And yet, through it all, the most valuable thing wasn't the money. It was the moments, the quiet mornings with Eva, the laughter of the kids playing in the yard, the feeling of coming home to a house that wasn't just a place, but a sanctuary. Winning the lottery was luck. Finding love again, building a family, that was the real jackpot.